So why do we become photographers or musicians? When Chet Atkins told his father he wanted to be a musician when he grows up, his father said, "Son, you can't do both." There's some truth in that. When you tell people you're going to be a photographer, their response is probably not, "Oh, great, I hear they have a great 401k." And yet, we do it. Why do we do it? Well, the poet David White says, we all come into this world with a question. We spend our lives not trying to answer the question, but trying to find the question. Because the question is not one that you answer, it's one you live. And I think we all have a sense of art as being a way into that, sort of a way that can help us with that quest. So I write poetry and I write songs, and the process of working with words obviously is different in its particularities than what you do with cameras and images and Photoshop and all that. But the overarching principles of creativity translate across all the disciplines, I believe. So let's think about the creative process in two ways. First, there's the creative process we undertake every time we develop an idea into a project. Then there's the capital C, capital P creative process, that of finding the core of your work and articulating your creative mission. Some call it finding your voice. For myself, I call it my creative mantra. And I'll explain a little bit about that. And it's a process that only happens over time, and only if you're paying attention to it. So how do we find an idea and develop it? Leonard Cohen famously said, "If I knew where the good songs came from, I'd go there more often." Well, for me, the ideas almost always come from images. Isn't that interesting? A vivid image from memory, an image that shows up from a line in poetry often does it to me. And sometimes of late, it's been images that show up when I read books and talks on philosophy, and more on that later. As a young songwriter in Nashville, I followed the Nashville template. That is to say, you find an interesting, hopefully unique and catchy title. You decide what the chorus is going to be, because that's where the title is going to reside. You decide what's going to be in the first verse to take you to that chorus, what's going to be in the second verse to provide more information about that chorus, figure out how you're going to end it. But you have to make sure with this Nashville template that you make a very short verse, because the mantra there is, don't bore us, get to the chorus. Now, that to me, that's kind of cynical, but that's the way they do it. And only after you've mapped all of this out do you actually begin to write a song. And usually when they're writing a song in Nashville, there are anywhere from 2 to 5 people in the room writing the song. It's all co-writers. And a lot of it is politics, because all these writers are writing for different publishing companies. They all want a shot at what you're writing. But there's a problem with that process. If you think you know what your work is about before you begin it, that's a problem, because it's not going to ever get any bigger than that. My writing is now much more free form. I find an idea that really interests me, and then I free write. It might even sound like nonsense at first, at least something, until something begins to gel. Maybe some of you have seen Julia Cameron's book, The Artist Way, where she encourages you to have these morning pages where you just write. And then after you've written a number of pages, suddenly there's something there and you go, oh, wow, there's something there. And you start working with it. Well, that's kind of like what my process is now. And interestingly enough, when that happens and things start to move in a direction and tell me kind of, maybe they want to go over here, a lot of times the original thought, the original idea, the original line, just kind of drops out. Because now the song or the poem is telling me, that no longer fits here. We're going over there. And paying attention to that, rather than trying to think you have your arms around it right from the very beginning, is much more my process now than it used to be. So how do you do that? How do you, when you sense that the work wants to go in a certain direction, how do you follow it? I've heard it described as walking along, and then you look down and you see a piece of string coming out of the ground. So you bend down to pull the string out of the ground. If you don't pull hard enough, it's not going to come out. If you pull too hard, it's going to break. So when you're in creation mode, there's always that familiar voice in the back of your head that says, that won't work. Do I hear some recognition there? That's stupid. No one's going to like that. Well, that is the voice we lovingly refer to as our editor. Beth Nielsen Chapman says that during that initial rush of creativity, you have to take your editor's mouth and gently, but firmly, attach duct tape. Because if you don't, if you allow the editor to come in while you're in that creative moment, the editor will kill it, and that string will break. So let's talk about the capital C, capital P creative process. That's where you decide which projects to do and which ones to say no to. That, over time, is how we develop the discernment necessary to keep from following every rabbit down its hole. More importantly, if we pay attention, it's how eventually we are able to articulate a personal creative mission, your creative mantra. Henri Cartier-Bresson said, your first 1,000 photographs are your worst. True of songs as well. Took me a long time and a lot of songs to understand what sort of writing really interested me, the bigger game I was after. And when that happened, I began searching only for those ideas that fit into that category. But in my early years, I wrote pretty much every idea that came into my head. I tried to finish every one. I was trying to be faithful to it. In retrospect, most of those ideas were trivial or banal, not unlike a lot of what you hear on the radio today. In fact, writers who write to the template I described earlier have another, more important mantra, and that is, take a small idea and make it smaller. Why? Because they have the idea that their listener has such a short attention span that if they don't get to the chorus within 20 seconds, they're going to change the radio dial. If the song's longer than 3 minutes, it's all over. If you got more than 2 verses, forget it. Take a small idea and make it smaller. Well, I wrote like that for a long time. That's how I wrote when I lived in Nashville, because that's what you do. But I've been preparing for an important show coming up next month because it's a listening room. I wanted to pare my set down to just the songs that represent me now. Out of about 50 songs that I played through in my living room, I found 7. 7 that accurately represented what I'm about and where I want to go. And I made a discovery in that process. That discovery was that none of those songs fit the old template. What I found was that I had a different mantra, and my mantra was take a big idea and make it accessible. And that's what I started doing. A few examples. In my song Rabbit Holes, I wrote about the paradoxes of quantum physics. How crazy it is that something can be a particle and a wave at the same time. How everything looks so solid, and yet in reality, it's full of empty space. One of those songs has 7 verses and no chorus. Now that's breaking the rules. The song I'm going to play for you today is about the crumbling of old institutions. Institutions and the uncertainty of life in what philosophers call this postmodern era. So yeah, take a big idea and make it accessible. But that exercise of playing through all my songs with a critical ear was incredibly valuable, because not only did it help me get a handle on my creative mantra, it helped me to understand what kinds of ideas and what kind of songs to be in tune for going forward. So what is your creative mantra? When you think about the ideas and the photographs that just really float your boat, you should do this exercise if you have not already done it. Take a hard look at a big stack of your photographs. Which one just really get you super excited? Which ones do you just go, oh man, I'd like to do that again? And which ones are just good photographs? Good photographs, but they're not that. What if you went out next week and just took one picture, but that one photograph fit into that first category and you could add it to that group? That's what I'm suggesting. Paul Simon has said that when he finished his song, Sounds of Silence, he said to himself, wow, that's better than I usually do. He was discovering his creative mantra. You may discover that your body is a good indicator. When I see, hear, or read something that really gets my juices flowing, I can feel it in my gut. Never, never ignore that feeling. Not a good idea, because your muses may be generous and kind, but they're not patient. If you don't take advantage of those ideas when they show up for you, the muse will find someone else who will. And that's just the way it works. When you listen to Leonard Cohen's songs, you find that a lot of them deal with the impossibility of perfection. He wrote around the periphery of that idea his whole career until 1992, when he was finally able to articulate it in his song called Anthem. In Anthem, which he says took him 10 years to write, he says, ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. It took him most of his life to get there, but he kept after it until he did. Now, I've mentioned Cohen twice. That's because I've studied and analyzed his songs for years. I knew that the mantra, take a small idea and make it smaller, was okay for a lot of folks, but it wasn't for me. I wanted to do what Cohen did. Take the big ideas and make them accessible. Other writers that do that include Tom Waits, Bob Dylan, Paul Simon. I've never met any of them, and yet I've learned so much from all of them. I call them my mentors in absentia. Who are yours? Because you need them. You need the models. You need to study their work until you understand what it is about those photographs that excites you, draws you to them. Your life, your creative life, depends on it. Depends on identifying that magic and deciding you can't live without being able to create images that do for others what those images do for you. So what you end up with will, of course, be different than your models, because no one besides you can see the world from your perspective. You have your own unique contribution to make to the culture. Most importantly, the images that you can make will never appear in the world unless you make them. If you persist, if you are driven, if you hone in on your mission, articulate your mantra, then your personal creative process, however you design it, will get you where you need to go. Thank you.